Can you grab my charger from upstairs? Elaine called from the living room, her voice tight with that familiar morning stress. We'd argued last night about her parents' upcoming visit, about how I never make an effort with them. I hadn't slept well. Sure, I muttered, knowing she couldn't hear me. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Our old house had wiring issues, another item on my endless to-do list. The refrigerator hummed back to life, its drone momentarily louder before settling into its usual rhythm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably work, wondering where their senior data analyst was on presentation day. Instead, a government alert banner stretched across my screen. Emergency alert, power outage reported across the Midwest region. Authorities investigating. Stay tuned for updates. I dismissed it with a swipe. Living in Columbus, we were technically Midwest, but our power had merely hiccuped. Probably some grid issue in Chicago or Detroit. I pocketed my phone and grabbed Elaine's charger from the bedroom. There's a blackout alert, I said, handing her the cord. But we seem fine. She barely looked up from her laptop. My meeting's in 15 minutes, and this presentation is stuck at 97% uploaded. Maybe use your hotspot if the internet gets spotty. She nodded, already elsewhere, fingers tapping rapidly. In the driveway, I noticed Mr. Whitaker across the street staring up at the power lines, a concerned expression on his weathered face. I raised my hand in greeting, but he didn't seem to notice. Traffic was lighter than usual on the way to work. The radio cycled through the regular morning shows, occasionally interrupted by brief updates about the outage. By the third interruption, the affected areas had expanded to include most of Michigan, Indiana, and parts of Illinois. No explanation yet, just the typical reassurances that utility companies were working on the issue. The Westbrook Technologies parking lot was half empty when I arrived. Inside, clusters of employees huddled around desks, their voices creating an anxious hum throughout the open floor plan. Davis. Marcus waved me over to his standing desk where a small crowd had gathered. His monitor displayed a news website with a map of the Midwest overlaid with a spreading darkness. Check this out, the blackout's moving. Like actually spreading in a pattern. I leaned in, professional skepticism taking over. That's just how they're restoring grid sections. Power comes back neighborhood by neighborhood. No man, it's spreading outward. Started in northern Michigan around 3 a.m., and it's been expanding ever since. Nothing's coming back online. Monica from accounting clutched her phone. My sister in Detroit says it's like the dark ages up there. No cell service, no power, nothing. And the National Guard is setting up checkpoints. I shrugged, trying to project calm rationality. Probably a cascading grid failure. Remember the Northeast blackout in 2003? Affected 55 million people. This is different, Marcus insisted, refreshing the page. The black area had indeed grown since I'd first looked. They're saying electronic devices are failing too, not just the power grid. Who's they? I asked. Social media and news, everyone. He gestured vaguely. The word unprecedented is trending. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. Emergency alert. Extended power disruption affecting multiple states. Conserve battery power. Avoid unnecessary travel in affected regions. Further instructions forthcoming. Conference room now. Our director's voice cut through the chatter. Westbrook team meeting in 5 minutes. The morning dissolved into a blur of contingency planning and backup protocols. Our servers in Chicago had gone offline, and clients were panicking. By noon, our internet connection had become frustratingly intermittent, loading pages at dial-up speeds when it worked at all. I tried calling Elaine twice, but the calls wouldn't connect. Text messages showed as sending before failing. Finally, around 2 o'clock, I got through. "Are you okay?" I asked immediately. "I'm fine," she sounded distracted. "Working from Cornerstone Coffee since our internet went down. The place is packed. Everyone's talking about the blackout. They're sending us home. Management says to prepare for remote work tomorrow, assuming we have power. Do you think we should get supplies?" People here are saying. Her voice cut out, replaced by static, then silence. "Elaine." I pulled the phone from my ear. Call failed. By the time I left the office, the city had changed. Traffic lights operated sporadically, causing gridlock at major intersections. Lines stretched out of gas stations as people filled not just their tanks but multiple gas cans. Outside the Kroger supermarket, a police officer directed the overflow of shoppers while a store employee taped a Limit 2 PER customer sign over the water aisle. I joined the gas station line, trying different news stations on the radio. Most broadcast static. The two that worked offered little beyond what I already knew. Power out. Spreading southward. Cause unknown. Authorities investigating. The digital billboard across the street flickered between a cola advertisement and an emergency alert message before going completely dark. 3 cars ahead of me, a man and woman were shouting at each other, gesturing angrily about something I couldn't hear. When I finally reached the pump, my credit card wouldn't scan. Neither would the second one. The attendant announced over the loudspeaker that they were now cash only. I had exactly $43 in my wallet, enough for half a tank and nothing more. The drive home took nearly an hour for what was normally 15 minutes. I passed people walking with oversized backpacks, families loading vehicles with supplies, and at one corner, a man with a cardboard sign that read simply, "The end comes in darkness." Our neighborhood appeared relatively normal until I noticed the details. More cars than usual in driveways. Windows open despite the autumn chill, probably to let in light before sunset. Mrs. Chun watering her plants with methodical focus, her movements slightly too precise, as if performing for unseen observers. Elaine's car wasn't in the driveway. Inside, I found a hastily scribbled note on the counter. At my parents'. Cell towers overloaded. Come when you can. I tried the TV. 3 channels showed emergency broadcast information, repeating the same vague instructions about conserving resources and awaiting further updates. The rest were static or simply black. The internet connected long enough for me to see that half my social media feeds had gone silent in the past few hours, while the active ones had devolved into speculation and panic. From the kitchen window, I watched the sunset with unusual attention, noticing how the fading light transformed the familiar landscape of our backyard into something less certain. As darkness settled, I realized how few lights appeared in the neighboring houses. Flashlights moved behind curtains. Candles flickered in windows. My phone buzzed with a final alert for the day. Emergency alert. Mandatory conservation measures in effect. Blackout zone expanded. Do not approach affected areas. Shelter in place until morning advisories. I switched off unnecessary lights and appliances, filled every container I could find with water, and tried Elaine's phone again. Nothing. Standing on our back porch that night, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. The city skyline to the north, usually a constellation of lights against the night sky, had vanished. In its place was perfect, absolute darkness, a void where human presence should be. And it seemed closer than it had been that morning. As I watched, our neighbor's porch light winked out, then another down the street, and another, sequential, deliberate, like dominoes falling in slow motion. For the first time, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I woke to the harsh blare of my phone's alarm, 5:30 a.m., still dark outside. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. The power was still on, which surprised me. I tapped my phone screen to check for updates and found 3 new emergency alerts that had arrived while I slept. Emergency alert, 3:17 a.m. Power restoration efforts ongoing. Residents in unaffected areas should remain at home. Avoid all unnecessary travel. Emergency alert, 4:22 a.m. Interstate highways 70, 71, and 270 closed for emergency vehicle access. Shelter in place. Emergency alert, 5:11 a.m. Evacuation orders for northern Columbus districts. Proceed to designated emergency shelters. Further instructions at locations. I stared at my screen, trying to make sense of the contradictory messages. Stay home or evacuate. In which northern districts? The vagueness was unsettling. Coffee seemed like a good idea, perhaps the last one I'd make with electricity for a while. As the machine gurgled, I tried calling Elaine's parents. The call connected, but immediately filled with a staticky pulse that forced me to pull the phone from my ear. I tried Elaine directly. Nothing. My fingers moved to my sister's contact in Michigan, even knowing it was futile. The call went through, surprisingly, but no one answered. After 4 rings, a voice, not my sister's, not the standard voicemail greeting, but something flat and mechanical, said, "The party you are trying to reach has been affected. Please stand by for further instructions." Then silence. I pocketed my phone and carried my coffee to the living room. The TV turned on, but instead of the usual morning shows, every channel displayed the same text crawl of emergency information, much of it repeating yesterday's vague updates. One bulletin caught my eye. Scientists from the National Energy Research Laboratory confirm the outage is not a conventional power grid failure. Residents are advised to distance themselves from all non-essential electronic devices when not in use. The broadcast cut to a press conference already in progress. A harried-looking woman in a FEMA jacket stood at a podium, maintaining a perimeter around the affected zone. I want to emphasize that there is no cause for panic. The situation is contained and the feed abruptly switched to a weather map, then to the emergency text crawl again. I flipped through channels, finding fragments of different broadcasts cutting in and out. A senator mid-sentence about national security implications. A CDC official discussing no evidence of biological components. A general standing before a map with large sections blacked out. My laptop connected to the internet after 3 attempts. Social media had transformed overnight into a chaos of information and misinformation. My cousin in Toledo says the military is shooting people trying to leave the blackout zone #MidwestBlackout. Confirmed. Electronic devices inside the blackout zone are working but behaving erratically. Sending weird messages. #what's coming through. They're lying about the cause. Notice how they cut off Dr. Winter's mid-explanation? #cover-up. Anyone else's clock's running wrong. My phone says it's 3:17 p.m., but it's clearly morning #timeslip. The timestamp on that last post caught my attention, 3:17. The same time as the first alert I'd received overnight. A coincidence, surely. I checked my own phone's time, 6:22 a.m. Then my watch, 6:22. The microwave clock, 6:22. All synchronized, all normal. Until I noticed the oven's digital display, 3:17. I must have reset it incorrectly after the power fluctuation yesterday. I reached to fix it, then hesitated. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced at the coffee maker's clock, 3:17. Outside, car doors slammed in quick succession. I moved to the window. The Cantos across the street were loading suitcases into their SUV, their movements hurried, faces grim. Next door, the Patels were doing the same. Other neighbors emerged from houses, some packing vehicles, others nailing plywood over windows. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Davis, it's Marcus from work. Get out while you still can. They're not telling us everything. The darkness isn't just power, it's something else. Devices near the edge are showing impossible things. Head south and don't stop." I texted back. "Where are you? What things?" No response. On impulse, I checked the work messaging system. Most of the company appeared offline, but a conversation from early morning caught my attention. HR_director. 2:46 a.m. All employees must report to office for emergency operation protocols. Government contract activated under national emergency provision. System admin. 3:17 a.m. HQ systems compromised. Unusual data patterns detected. Please advise. CEO_Lambert. 3:18 a.m. Disregard previous messages. Remain at your homes. This is Douglas Lambert. The office is not safe. They are not us. Then nothing more. I tried calling the office. The line connected, but instead of ringing, I heard a low humming punctuated by what sounded like Morse code. I hung up. My television flicked on by itself, making me jump. The emergency broadcast system tone blared, but the message that followed contained only static and fragmented words. Containment failure. Spreading south at velocity. Do not attempt to. Electrical devices may. Cognitive effects include. The broadcast cut out. When the TV came back on seconds later, a single line of text appeared. The alert system has been compromised. Stand by for authenticated instructions. Then the screen went black. Outside, military helicopters thundered overhead, flying south. I counted 6 before they disappeared beyond the horizon. In their wake, an unnatural silence settled over the neighborhood. My watch had stopped. 7:17 a.m. I checked my phone. 3:17 p.m. The wall clock. 11:46 a.m. Each device showed a different time, as if reality itself couldn't agree on when we were. I decided to drive to Elaine's parents' house in Grove City, south of Columbus. As I threw essential supplies into a duffel bag, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. Elaine's name flashed on the screen. "Elaine, are you okay? Where are you?" Static hissed, then her voice came through, distant and broken. "Davis, can't explain. Don't trust when they say to look up, don't. Different when darkness, not working right." "Elaine, you're breaking up. Are you at your parents'? Tried to leave, checkpoints, sending people back. They're scanning for Davis, destroy your phone before. Her voice distorted into digital noise, then cleared momentarily. Not what we thought, spreading faster now. The call dropped. I tried calling back immediately, but an automated voice informed me that the number was no longer in service. The bathroom mirror caught my attention as I grabbed my toothbrush. My reflection looked wrong somehow, a half-second delayed, as if struggling to keep up. I leaned closer, and for an instant, I could swear my reflection's eyes were completely black before normalizing. I backed away, heart racing. In the hallway, my neighbor Mrs. Chin knocked frantically at my door. Her normally composed face was twisted with fear. "You need to come see," she said, not waiting for a greeting. "The northern sky." I followed her to the street where a small group of neighbors had gathered, all facing the same direction. The morning should have been brightening into full day, but the northern horizon remained unnaturally dark. Not the darkness of night or storm clouds, but a perfect absence of light, as if that section of the world had been erased. The darkness had a distinct edge, a wall of nothing advancing toward us. My phone buzzed one final time in my pocket. Another emergency alert. Emergency alert. Do not approach the darkness. Do not look directly at the message cut off abruptly. In that same moment, every electronic device on the street, phones, cars, watches, emitted the same alert tone simultaneously, then fell silent. Mrs. Chun gripped my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. My son called from Cincinnati before his phone died. He said the people who went into the darkness, they're still there, still moving, but they're not people anymore. As we stood there, the street lights shut off one by one, a cascading line of darkness moving steadily toward us. I threw the last of my supplies into the car, bottled water, canned food, flashlights, batteries, first aid kit, basic survival gear, rational preparations for a power outage. I told myself, not for the end of the world. The morning sun should have been warming the sky by now, but an unnatural twilight persisted, as if daybreak itself was being suppressed. My neighbors had mostly vanished, either evacuated or barricaded inside their homes. Only Mrs. Chun remained on the street, staring northward at the advancing wall of darkness, now visibly closer than it had been just an hour ago. "You should come with me," I called to her as I slammed my trunk shut. "I'm heading south to find my wife." She shook her head without looking at me. "My husband will return soon. He went to find our daughter at Ohio State yesterday." Her voice was flat, devoid of its usual musical lilt. "We will be together when it comes." I didn't argue. Everyone was coping in their own way with whatever this was. As I slid into the driver's seat, my radio clicked on without my touching it. Through bursts of static, a calm male voice spoke. "Remain in your homes. The phenomenon is being contained. Military and emergency personnel are establishing safe zones. I repeat, do not attempt to evacuate without official guidance. Unauthorized movement may result in..." The broadcast cut off abruptly, replaced by a different voice, female and urgent. "This is an emergency override. Previous broadcasts have been compromised. The darkness is advancing faster than projected. Southern routes remain open. Proceed immediately to designated evacuation points. Follow the..." Static again, then silence. I turned the key in the ignition. The car sputtered but wouldn't start. I tried again and again, my frustration mounting with each failed attempt. On the fourth try, the engine finally caught, but the dashboard lit up with warning lights, battery, engine, systems I didn't even recognize. The gas gauge swung wildly between full and empty. The GPS screen flickered to life without my input, displaying a map that looked nothing like Columbus. Roads curved where they should have been straight, intersections appeared where none existed, and a pulsing path highlighted a route I didn't recognize. I switched it off and pulled out my phone instead. No signal. The compass app spun in continuous circles, unable to find north. Every other navigation app showed different, contradictory maps of the city. Cursing under my breath, I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and put the car in reverse. I'd have to navigate by memory and road signs. Grove City was south. All I needed to do was keep the darkness behind me. Main Street was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. I weaved between them, driving on sidewalks when necessary. At the first major intersection, a military checkpoint blocked the road. 2 Humvees and a dozen soldiers in full tactical gear, faces obscured by gas masks. I slowed to a stop as a soldier approached, rifle held at a casual but ready position. "Identification," he demanded through the mask, voice muffled. I handed him my driver's license. I'm trying to reach my wife in Grove City. What's happening? What is this darkness? He ignored my questions, studying my ID longer than necessary. Finally, he looked up, his eyes unreadable behind the mask's lenses. This road is closed. Return to your home immediately. But the evacuation alerts. Compromised communications, he interrupted. There is no official evacuation. Return home and wait for authorized instructions. Look, my wife is. Sir. His voice hardened. Turn your vehicle around now, or you will be detained. Other soldiers had moved closer, hands shifting on their weapons. I noticed none of them wore name tags or unit insignia. Their uniforms bore no markings at all. I nodded slowly. All right, I'll head back. The soldiers stepped away. I turned the car around, driving at a reasonable pace until the checkpoint disappeared from my rearview mirror. At the next side street, I turned right, then navigated a complex route through residential areas, seeking alternate ways south. 3 blocks later, I spotted another checkpoint in the distance. I pulled into a driveway and cut the engine, thinking every major road would be monitored. Maybe back roads? But without GPS or phone. A sharp rap on my window made me jump. An elderly man with wild white hair peered in at me, gesturing frantically for me to roll down the window. They're not letting anyone out, are they? He asked before I could speak. No. Do you know another way south? He glanced around nervously. Maybe. But first, show me your eyes. What? Your eyes, son. Let me see them. I frowned but leaned forward, looking directly at him. He studied me intently, then nodded. Still human. Good. Come inside, quickly. Not safe out here. Against my better judgment, I followed him into his house. The curtains were drawn, the interior dim and cluttered. Scientific journals and papers covered every surface. One wall was plastered with maps marked with concentric circles expanding outward from a point in northern Michigan. Professor Howard Reynolds, he introduced himself, locking the door behind us. Theoretical physics, retired. And you're caught in the same trap as the rest of us. Davis Mercer, I replied. And what trap is that, exactly? Reynolds moved to the kitchen table, where an ancient ham radio sat among stacks of notebooks. They're calling it a blackout, but it's nothing so simple. Power could be restored. This, he gestured toward the covered windows. This is something entering our reality. Or perhaps our reality being rewritten. I massaged my temples, feeling a headache building. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't it? He flipped open a notebook. I've been tracking anomalies since the first reports. Electronic devices failing in specific patterns. Compass needles pointing to a single location rather than magnetic north. Time discrepancies increasing with proximity to the event horizon. Event horizon? Like a black hole. A conceptual boundary between what we understand and what we don't. Between here and elsewhere. He tapped the map on the wall. It started here at the Lakeside Research Facility. Supposedly a weather monitoring station, but my colleagues who consulted there spoke of quantum experiments, dimensional research. I wanted to dismiss him as a conspiracy theorist, but after what I'd seen, what happens to people in the darkness? I asked. Reynolds' expression darkened. Reports vary. Some say nothing. The darkness passes, and they remain physically unchanged. Others describe profound disorientation, memory loss, personality changes. The most troubling accounts suggest complete transformation, still appearing human, but serving as vessels. Vessels for what? He switched on the ham radio, adjusting dials until voices emerged through the static. Most were frantic, fragmented conversations between operators. Reynolds bypassed these, focusing on finding a specific frequency. There, he said as a clear voice cut through. Day 2 of observation. The boundary continues to expand at approximately 1.7 miles per hour. Subjects within the affected zone report identical dreams of a vast presence beneath black water. Those closest to the initial site have stopped communicating entirely. Devices recovered from the zone contain data that matches no known format. When analyzed, the data appears to reconstruct itself into new patterns. We've isolated what might be a message repeating throughout. We are the new light after darkness falls. Reynolds switched it off. That was a research team near Toledo, broadcasting on emergency band 12 hours ago. They've since gone silent. My phone buzzed in my pocket, impossible given the lack of signal. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a single message. Elaine, Davis, don't come here. Not safe. They've set up scanners at all checkpoints. They're looking for something in people's brainwaves. Those who fail the scan don't come back. I love why. The message cut off. The timestamp read 3:17 p.m. Again. Your wife? Reynolds asked, noticing my expression. I nodded, showing him the message. The scanners are real, he confirmed. Military brought in specialized equipment yesterday. They're not keeping people in to protect them, they're containing something. Or selecting. Outside, a low rumble grew steadily louder. Reynolds pulled back a corner of curtain. Military convoy. More than yesterday. I joined him at the window. A line of olive-drab trucks rolled past, interspersed with Humvees and larger vehicles covered with tarps. The soldiers visible in the passing vehicles stared straight ahead, expressions blank. They're retreating, Reynolds whispered, pulling back the perimeter. As the last vehicle passed, something impossible happened. A man stepped out from between two parked cars across the street, a man I recognized with sickening clarity. It was Marcus from work, the one who had texted me to flee. But something was wrong with him. He moved with jerking, puppet-like motions. When he turned toward the house, I recoiled from the window. His face was expressionless, eyes wide and unblinking. He raised one arm, pointing directly at us. He sees us, I hissed. Reynolds yanked me away from the window. Not him. Not anymore. What do you mean? Look at his shadow. I risked another glance. Marcus still pointed at the house, but his shadow on the pavement behind him didn't match his pose. It writhed and shifted, stretching into impossible shapes. What the hell is that? I whispered. The first sign, Reynolds said grimly. When they come back changed, the shadows show what they really are now. He moved quickly through the house, grabbing a backpack already prepared. We need to leave. Now. They'll send more. Leave how? The checkpoints. Sewers, he interrupted. Old maintenance tunnels from the 30s. They connect to the storm drainage system. We can bypass the checkpoints, get south of the city. As we headed for the basement door, my phone buzzed one final time. No message, just an emergency alert. Emergency alert. Do not approach the darkness. Do not look directly at the shadows. They are not what they appear. I turned off my phone and followed Reynolds down the stairs, away from the spreading dark. The maintenance tunnels beneath Columbus were a labyrinth of concrete arteries, dimly lit by our flashlights. Reynolds moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating the turns with practiced confidence. Water dripped from rusted pipes above, forming shallow puddles that rippled as we passed. How do you know about these tunnels? I asked, my voice echoing against the damp walls. I mapped them years ago, he replied without slowing. Part of a historical society project. The city wanted to repurpose some for utility lines, but most were forgotten. We'd been underground for nearly an hour, Reynolds consulting a hand-drawn map at each junction. The tunnels felt safe, no electronics, no shadows except our own, cast plainly by our flashlights. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded rather than escaping. Here, Reynolds said, stopping at a junction where newer concrete met the old. We follow this drainage channel south. It runs parallel to the Scioto River, eventually passing under the highway. Before we could proceed, a distant mechanical sound echoed through the tunnels, a grinding of metal against concrete. Reynolds extinguished his flashlight immediately. Turn it off, he whispered. In the sudden darkness, the grinding grew louder. Something large was moving through the tunnels. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing as quietly as possible. Do you think it's military? I whispered. Military doesn't patrol down here, Reynolds replied, his voice barely audible. And they wouldn't move like that. The sound changed direction, heading toward us. With it came a faint blue luminescence that seemed to emanate from the water itself, growing brighter as the grinding approached. Reynolds tugged my sleeve. This way. Quickly. We retreated down a side passage, the blue light following, casting our shadows long behind us. My shadow seemed to move a split second after I did, like an echo of my movements. I forced myself not to look at it directly. The passage ended at a maintenance room filled with ancient electrical equipment. Reynolds closed the heavy metal door behind us and wedged a broken pipe against it. What was that thing? I asked, trying to control my breathing. I don't know, he admitted. But did you see how the water behaved near it? Moving against gravity, forming patterns? I had. The puddles had rippled toward the light rather than away from it, the water rising into geometric shapes before falling back. Reynolds pulled a small notebook from his pocket and sketched rapidly. I've seen this behavior described in reports from Michigan. Water responding to proximity, forming symbols. He showed me the drawing, concentric circles with lines radiating outward like a stylized eye. "It's trying to communicate," he said, "or observe." The barricaded door shuddered as something heavy pressed against it. The pipe holding it shut groaned but held. Through the small gap beneath the door, blue light spilled into the room, unnaturally bright. Water began seeping through, not flowing naturally but creeping up the door in thin rivulets that formed the same eye pattern Reynolds had drawn. "We need another way out," I hissed, searching the walls for ventilation shafts, access panels, anything. Reynolds pointed to a maintenance ladder in the corner. "That should lead to a street grate." The door shuddered again, the metal beginning to warp inward. Whatever lurked beyond was applying impossible pressure. We scrambled up the ladder, Reynolds first despite his age. The access hatch at the top was secured with a rusted wheel lock that initially refused to budge. I braced myself on the rungs, pushing with all my strength until it finally gave way with a screech of protest. Below, the door burst open. I didn't look down, didn't want to see what entered. Reynolds pushed through the hatch and I followed, emerging into the fading daylight of late afternoon. We found ourselves in an alley behind a row of shuttered businesses. The city sounds were wrong, too quiet, with occasional mechanical noises that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sky above was a sickly yellow-gray, neither day nor night, but something in between. "Where are we?" I asked, getting my bearings. "Should be near German Village," Reynolds replied, studying the buildings. "South of downtown, at least." Then we made it past the checkpoints. He nodded cautiously, assuming the perimeter hasn't expanded while we were underground. I pulled out my phone, forgetting I'd turned it off. When I pressed the power button, nothing happened. The battery had been nearly full. Now it was dead, the screen a blank mirror reflecting my tired face. Reynolds produced a small compass from his pocket. The needle spun lazily before settling on a direction that couldn't possibly be north. "It's pointing toward the center of the phenomenon," he said quietly. "They all do now." I scanned the skyline, trying to spot landmarks. In the distance, the state capitol building stood silhouetted against the strange sky, but something about its dome seemed wrong. Too angular, with protrusions that hadn't been there before. "We should find shelter before dark," Reynolds said, eyeing the sky nervously. "Real dark, not whatever this is." We moved cautiously through back streets, avoiding main roads where military vehicles occasionally passed. The few civilians we saw hurried along with heads down, avoiding eye contact. Every digital sign we passed displayed the same time, 3:17. Reynolds led us to a small bookstore with enclosed sign in the window. The door was unlocked. Inside, books lay scattered across the floor as if someone had left in a hurry. "We'll rest here," he said, securing the door behind us. "Set up a watch rotation." Using books as impromptu blinds, I created a small window to observe the street while Reynolds arranged what supplies we had. As the strange half-light outside dimmed further, I noticed how shadows began behaving oddly, stretching too long, moving when they shouldn't, some appearing without obvious sources. "Reynolds," I called softly, "you need to see this." He joined me at the window. Outside, the shadows of ordinary objects, mailboxes, street signs, parked cars, had detached from their sources and now moved independently, flowing together like black mercury to form a large pool of darkness in the center of the street. From this pool, a figure rose, humanoid but wrong, with proportions that defied anatomy. It stood perfectly still for a moment, then began methodically examining each building, pressing what might have been hands against doors and windows. "It's searching," Reynolds whispered. "For what?" "For anomalies. Things that don't belong." "Like us," I realized. We retreated from the window, moving deeper into the store. Reynolds guided me to a small office in the back where a large mirror hung on the wall. He positioned it so it faced the front of the store, then set up a second smaller mirror on the desk. "We can watch without direct line of sight," he explained, adjusting the angles until the street was visible in the reflection of the reflection. Through this double mirror, I watched as more shadow figures emerged, each taking a different direction. They moved with purpose, with intelligence. "You said you were trying to reach your wife," Reynolds said quietly. "Where exactly?" "Her parents' house in Grove City, about 15 miles south." He nodded slowly. "We'll try at first light. For now, we watch and learn." Through the night, we took turns observing through the mirror system. I witnessed shadow figures entering homes, people being let out afterward, walking normally, but with that same puppet-like quality I'd seen in Marcus. Their shadows betrayed them, writhing and stretching into impossible shapes. During my watch, I found a battery-powered radio in the office. Most frequencies broadcast static, but one, low on the AM band, carried a voice reciting numbers in a monotone. 16.7 miles expansion, 8.3 miles to Capital District, 942 subjects processed, 417 rejected, 525 integrated, integration rate improving, estimated completion of Phase 1, 36 hours. The voice continued, clinical and detached, until it suddenly cut off mid-sentence. In the silence that followed, I heard something else, a high, thin whine just at the edge of hearing, coming from outside. The shadows in the street suddenly froze, then rushed back to their sources like rewinding film. The shadow figures dissipated. Every light in the area, street lamps, signs, distant windows, flickered once, twice, then glowed with increased brightness. Through our mirror system, I watched as every person who had been processed stopped in unison, turned toward the north, and raised their faces to the sky. Reynolds jolted awake beside me. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I whispered, unable to look away from the mirrors. "But I think it's beginning the next phase." In the reflection of the reflection, I saw something impossible descending from above, a pillar of light that was somehow also darkness, cutting through the night sky like a negative image of lightning. When it touched the ground, every electronic device in the store surged to life simultaneously. The dead computer, the cash register, even my phone in my pocket. My phone displayed a single message. "Emergency alert. Witnessing protocol activated. Document what you see. Do not interfere. Do not resist. Remain human." Reynolds stared at the alert on his own device. "Witnessing protocol? What does that mean?" I had no answer, but as I looked back to the mirrors, I understood. We weren't meant to escape. We were meant to see, to record, to remember. Outside, the changed people began to synchronize their movements, forming concentric circles around the pillar. Their shadows stretched toward it, feeding into it like tributaries to a river. For the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't an invasion or disaster. It was a transformation, and we were next. I woke to the persistent ticking of a clock I don't own. My eyes blinked open to darkness, but not the complete blackness that had swallowed the city. This was the familiar darkness of my bedroom at night, though something felt off about the quality of the shadows. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen's harsh glow. 3:47 a.m. Ticking continued, methodical and wrong. I'd thrown out my grandfather's old mantel clock years ago, yet the sound was unmistakable, the particular mechanical click of its brass workings. Following the noise, I moved through my apartment in the dark, running my hand along the wall to keep my bearings. The sound led me to the kitchen. There, on the counter, sat grandfather's clock. "This isn't possible," I whispered, voice cracking from disuse. How long had it been since I'd spoken aloud? Days? A week? My trembling fingers traced the familiar walnut casing. The brass pendulum swung with hypnotic precision behind clouded glass. According to its face, the time was 11:23. Not AM, not PM. The hand simply pointed to 11:23, as though time had become untethered from its usual demarcations. I backed away, heart hammering, then turned to check my phone again. 3:47 a.m. Still. I stared at it for nearly a minute. The digits didn't change. I tapped the screen, reopened the clock app. 3:47 a.m. For the first time since the blackout began, I felt true panic rising. Not the fear of darkness or isolation, but something worse, the fear that reality itself was coming undone. I grabbed a sharpener from a drawer and made a mark on the wall, a simple line. Proof that I was here, that I existed in this moment. If time was breaking down, I would create my own measurement. Sleep was impossible after that. I waited for dawn, watching as gray light grudgingly filtered through my curtains. When I judged it to be morning, I made another mark on the wall. 2 days since complete power loss. 6 days since the first emergency alert. I made coffee using my camping stove, then sat by the window with my notebook. I'd started keeping careful records of everything. Time, as best I could estimate. Observations, strange occurrences. I needed something to ground me, to maintain my grip on rationality. As I flipped to a blank page, my blood froze. The page wasn't blank. My handwriting covered it, detailing events for today, events that hadn't happened yet. Military convoy passed at approximate 10 a.m. 6 vehicles. Soldiers appeared disoriented. Water in bathroom sink moved against gravity at 2:13 p.m. Found symbols etched into hallway floor that I don't remember making. Important, do not answer door at sunset. I slammed the notebook shut. This wasn't possible. I hadn't written this. I couldn't have. My hand shook as I picked up my pen and opened to a different page. I wrote, "I am still me. Today is day 6. I did not write the predictions. Then I waited. At 9:58 a.m., according to my useless phone, still frozen at 3:47, I heard engines. I peered through my curtains to see exactly what my notebook had described. 6 military vehicles moving slowly down my street. The soldiers inside looked lost, confused. One was speaking urgently into a radio, gesturing in a way that suggested frustration. Another stared blankly at a map. None seemed to notice me watching them. Dread pooled in my stomach. I returned to the notebook and turned to the prediction page, my eyes fixating on the next item. Water in bathroom sink moved against gravity at 2:13 p.m. I waited in the bathroom for over an hour, staring at the sink. Nothing happened. Relief washed over me. The predictions were wrong. I wasn't losing my mind. Then I noticed the mirror above the sink was showing something impossible. My reflection stood there, but I wasn't looking at the mirror. My reflection was writing something on a piece of paper, focused intently on its task. I approached slowly, watching my other self continue writing. When I raised my hand, my reflection didn't mimic me. It kept writing. Only when I touched the cool surface of the mirror did my reflection look up, meeting my eyes with an expression of pure terror. It held up the paper to the glass. "They're changing the rules." I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of towels. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my horrified face. A drip drew my attention downward. Water from the faucet was collecting on the underside of the spout, gathering into a small bead. As I watched, the droplet grew larger, then began to flow upward, defying gravity. More drops followed, creating a small stream that spiraled upward into the air, forming complex patterns before dispersing into vapor. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m. The time hadn't changed, but somehow I knew it was exactly 2:13 p.m. Half mad with fear, I searched the apartment for the symbols my notebook had mentioned. I found them in the hallway, intricate patterns carved into the floorboards that resembled mathematical equations more than any language I recognized. They hadn't been there that morning. I couldn't have made them. I owned nothing capable of carving such precise lines into hardwood. I spent the afternoon boarding up my door, using furniture to create a barricade. Whatever was coming at sunset, I wouldn't answer. I wouldn't let it in. As the light outside shifted toward evening gold, someone knocked. 3 sharp raps, perfectly spaced. I froze, barely breathing. "Hello," a woman's voice, professional and calm. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Weiss from the Department of Energy's Special Research Division. I know you're in there. Please, we don't have much time." I said nothing. The blackout isn't what you think. It's not electrical. It's a breakdown in the fundamental physics of our reality. We've been tracking the phenomenon for months, but it's accelerating beyond our models. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. "Prove you're real," I called out. A manila folder slid under the door. Inside were scientific readings, charts showing cascading failures across multiple sites, and photographs of tears in what appeared to be the fabric of space itself. "We've placed monitoring equipment in key locations," she continued as I examined the documents. "I need to install sensors in your building. You're at a critical juncture point in the reality degradation field." The papers looked legitimate, covered with government seals and technical jargon beyond my understanding. But something felt wrong. I returned to my notebook, rereading my own warning. "Do not answer door at sunset." "I can't let you in," I said finally. Silence followed, stretching uncomfortably. "I understand," she replied eventually. "I'm leaving the equipment outside your door. The instructions are simple. Just place the main unit near your most frequent location in the apartment and press the red button. It measures reality stability, like a Geiger counter, but for the coherence of space-time itself." I heard something heavy being set down. "When it starts beeping rapidly, you'll know you have approximately 12 hours before this section of reality collapses entirely. Good luck." Footsteps receded down the hallway. I waited an hour before cracking the door open. A metal case sat on my welcome mat, blinking with small green lights. I brought it inside, but didn't activate it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection writing warnings I couldn't quite read. The ticking of the impossible clock filled my apartment, though when I checked the kitchen, it had vanished. In the morning, I found family photographs changed, subtle alterations at first. My sister's hair color was wrong. My parents stood in front of a house they'd never owned. Then more dramatic changes. People I didn't recognize replacing loved ones, faces blurring at the edges, backgrounds shifting to places that couldn't exist. As I stared at a photo of myself standing alone on a beach I'd never visited, an emergency alert crackled through the police radio I'd salvaged days ago. The affected zone has expanded to 13 states. We cannot contain it. Prepare for contact. The voice sounded like mine. I realized then that the darkness wasn't spreading. Our reality was shrinking, folding in on itself. We weren't being plunged into darkness. We were being erased, rewritten. And somewhere in the collapsing spaces between what was and what would be, I had already lived through this. I was trying to warn myself, but it was too late. It had always been too late. It started with a knock. 3 days had passed since I discovered the reality monitor. At least, I think it was 3 days. The device remained unplugged, its blinking lights occasionally catching my eye from the corner where I'd stashed it. I'd drawn the curtains tight, reinforced my barricades, and retreated into a routine of obsessive note-taking and silent observation. The knocking came at precisely 9:17 a.m. according to my grandfather's clock, which had reappeared on my bookshelf overnight. "Hello? Anyone home?" A woman's voice, pleasant and normal. So normal it made my skin crawl. I froze, pen hovering above my notebook. No one should be knocking. The building had emptied days ago. I'd watched my neighbors flee one by one until only silence remained. "I know someone's in there. I can see your light." "What light?" The power was gone. I used candles sparingly and only away from windows. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A woman in her mid-30s stood in the hallway, smiling directly at me as if she could see through the door. She wore a neat pantsuit and carried a briefcase, the kind of outfit you'd wear to a corporate job interview. Her smile never wavered, never blinked. "I have information about the Blackout," she said, her voice suddenly right against the door. "May I please come in?" A chill ran through me. There was something deeply wrong with how she stood, how she spoke, too perfect, too rehearsed. "Who are you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Andrea Mitchell. I live in 4B. She gestured down the hall. "I've been away, just got back. May I please come in?" No one named Andrea lived in 4B. I knew my neighbors. Before all this, I'd been on the building's community board. 4B belonged to an elderly man named Gerald who kept to himself. "I have some supplies to share," she continued, her tone unchanged. "May I please come in?" The third repetition of that phrase, "May I please come in?" triggered something in my memory. Old folklore about certain things needing permission to cross thresholds. "I'm sorry, I can't open the door," I replied. "There's a quarantine protocol in effect." Her smile widened just slightly. "I understand. When you change your mind, I'll be waiting. We all will." She turned and walked away with movements too fluid to be natural, disappearing around the corner. I pressed my ear against the door, but heard no footsteps fading down the hallway. Hours later, I was startled by another knock. This time, a man's voice called out, "Package delivery. Need a signature, please." Through the peephole, a man in what looked like a delivery uniform, holding a brown box. But the uniform was wrong. Not quite any real company I recognized, the colors slightly off, the logo blurred as if my eyes couldn't focus on it. "Just leave it," I said. "Can't do that, sir. Need a signature. Company policy. May I please come in just for a moment?" There it was again, that same formal request for entry. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want whatever you're selling." He tilted his head at an impossible angle. "We're not selling anything. We're giving back what was taken. May I please come in?" "Leave now, or I'm calling the police." An empty threat. No phones worked, no authorities remained to call. The delivery man stared silently at the peephole for nearly a minute, his eyes never blinking, before turning and walking away with the same unnaturally smooth movements as the woman. By midday, I'd had 5 more visitors. A pair of children selling fundraiser candy, a maintenance worker claiming to need access to pipes, a census taker, a religious missionary, and someone claiming to be my cousin from out of town. Each one perfectly ordinary at first glance. Each one subtly wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Each one asking permission to enter using those exact words. I watched from my window as they gathered in the courtyard below, a dozen figures now, standing motionless, occasionally looking up at my apartment. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't shift their weight or fidget. They simply waited. The sound of helicopter rotors broke the eerie silence. I rushed to the window and saw military helicopters approaching from the east, flying low over the buildings. As they passed overhead, objects fell from their open doors, Not bombs, but leaflets, hundreds of them scattering in the wind. I cracked my window just enough to snatch one as it fluttered past. Emergency evacuation order. All residents must proceed immediately to designated extraction points. Bring only essential documents and medication. Compliance is mandatory. The bottom showed a crude map with a location marked 2 miles east. I flipped it over. Remain in your homes. Shelter in place until further notice. Do not trust evacuation orders. They are not from US. 2 contradictory messages on the same paper. I watched as more leaflets fell, the visitors below never moving to collect them, never looking up at the helicopters. As daylight faded, I found myself drawn to a box I'd shoved under my bed years ago and forgotten. Inside were documents from my time working at the university research lab, a job I'd left after disagreements with management over ethical concerns. I'd taken copies of certain files when I left, uncertain if I'd ever need them. Among the papers was a classified briefing about theoretical physics anomalies detected in the Midwest. The report was dated 3 years ago. It detailed unusual readings that matched the patterns now spreading across the country, and it included speculative theories about reality incursions and dimensional bleeding. Most disturbing was a memo discussing biosignature anomalies associated with the phenomena. People who appeared human but whose vital signs and brainwave patterns showed subtle irregularities. The memo recommended immediate containment of all affected individuals. My phone, dead for days, suddenly chimed. I nearly dropped it in shock as the screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID showed my own number. I answered with trembling hands. "Don't trust what comes next," my voice said from the other end. The connection was poor, filled with static and strange echoes. "They look like us, talk like us, but they're just placeholders. Sketches. They're mapping us, learning our rules." "Who is this really?" I whispered. "You know who this is." My voice sounded tired, defeated. "Listen carefully. In exactly 47 minutes, they're going to try a new approach. Don't let them in. No matter what they say, no matter what they show you, don't." The call cut off. The phone went dark again, battery completely drained. I spent the next hour in paralyzed anticipation, jumping at every sound. When the knock finally came, it was gentle, almost hesitant. "Please," said a voice I recognized instantly. My sister's voice. "Please, I know you're in there. I'm scared. Let me in." It sounded exactly like her, the slight tremor when she was frightened, the particular way she pronounced certain words. I pressed my hands against the door, tears streaming down my face. "You're not her," I whispered, more to myself than to whatever stood on the other side. "It's me, I swear. Please, may I come in? Just open the door and see for yourself." I said nothing, biting my lip until I tasted blood. "Fine," the voice finally said, all pretense of emotion vanishing. "We'll try again tomorrow." That night, I was awakened by the sound of something massive moving outside. The entire building trembled. I stumbled to the window and looked out at the street. The neighboring buildings were gone. Where there should have been apartments and shops now stood an empty void, not darkness, but absence. The edges of reality seemed to have been erased, leaving nothing behind. My building now stood alone on the edge of existence, a solitary island in a sea of nothingness. And in that nothingness, countless eyes were watching. Dawn broke differently today. Instead of the gradual lightening of the sky, there was a sudden shift, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment darkness, the next a strange, diffuse light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood at my window, coffee cup cooling in my trembling hand, staring at what used to be my neighborhood. My building stood alone now, an island in a sea of nothing. Not darkness, not emptiness, but something that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The edges where reality had been torn away weren't clean. They shimmered and warped, occasionally revealing glimpses of something else behind the tear. I'd been clinging to logic, to rational explanations. Solar flares disrupting the power grid. Mass hysteria. Government experiments gone wrong. Even a coordinated terrorist attack seemed plausible compared to what I was now forced to accept. Reality itself was coming apart at the seams. As I watched, a piece of the void rippled, then tore. The rip appeared about 20 feet from my window, a vertical slash in the air itself. Through it, I caught a momentary glimpse of somewhere else, a place of impossible geometry and colors that shouldn't exist. The tear widened for a few seconds before snapping shut with a sound like thunder. My coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the floor. I barely noticed. More tears began appearing, small at first, just pinprick holes in the fabric of existence. But they were growing larger, more frequent. Through some, I saw landscapes that might have been Earth once, but were now transformed into twisted versions of themselves. Through others, I saw things moving, shapes that defied description, entities that seemed to notice me watching them. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. This was it. The moment when skepticism became impossible, when the full horror of what was happening could no longer be denied or rationalized away. My radio crackled to life unexpectedly, making me jump. I'd been scanning frequencies periodically, hoping for information, but had heard nothing for days. Now it emitted a series of numbers in a computerized voice. 7, 4, 2, 1. A pause then. 6, 4, 2, 1. Another pause. 5, 4, 2, 1. With sudden clarity, I understood. These weren't random numbers. They were counting down regions still intact. 7 yesterday, 6 today, 5 tomorrow. The broadcast continued, listing coordinates that meant nothing to me before ending with, remain in containment, await extraction, the threshold approaches. I spent the next hour frantically searching through my apartment for anything that might help me understand what was happening. In a kitchen drawer, I found an old map and plotted the coordinates from memory. They formed a shrinking circle, and my location was near its center. Whatever this phenomenon was, I was close to its origin point. A pounding at my door startled me from my thoughts. Not the polite knocking of yesterday's visitors, but desperate hammering. Please, for God's sake, let me in. They're right behind me. The voice sounded genuinely terrified. Human. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A man in the tattered remains of what had once been a government uniform stood there, looking frantically over his shoulder. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide with genuine terror. I can see you in there, he gasped. Please. I was part of the response team. I know what's happening. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door, keeping the chain on. What do you want? I asked. They abandoned us, he said, words tumbling out. The extraction teams, the containment units, they're all gone. High-level officials were evacuated days ago. The rest of us were left to monitor the spread until... He swallowed hard. Until it was too late. What is it? What's causing this? He laughed, a broken sound. We thought it was a natural phenomenon at first. Some kind of quantum breakdown. But it's not. It's... He looked over his shoulder again. It's coming in. Whatever's on the other side, it's finding its way through the tears. I opened the door wider, but kept the chain in place. Tell me what you know. All of it. The blackout was just a side effect, he explained, calmer now. When it began entering our reality, it disrupted electrical fields first. Then magnetic. Now it's disrupting the underlying structure of space-time itself. It? What is it? We don't know exactly. But the signals... He stopped abruptly, eyes widening as he stared at something behind me. Your walls. The patterns. I turned to look. Across my apartment walls, faint lines had appeared, complex mathematical patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I hadn't noticed them forming. How long have those been there? He asked, voice barely a whisper. I don't know. The patterns reminded me of the symbols I'd found carved into my floor days earlier. You're further along than I thought, he said, backing away from the door. It's already claimed this space. You're living in a threshold now. Wait, what does that mean? What's happening to me? But he was already running down the hallway, disappearing around the corner. I closed and locked the door, then turned to examine the patterns more closely. They covered every wall now, glowing faintly with an inner light. As I stared, I realized they weren't random. They formed equations, formulas, a complex mathematical language describing transformations I couldn't begin to comprehend. My memories felt fragmented suddenly. Had I always lived here? Was this always what my apartment looked like? I couldn't remember the color of my bedroom walls before the patterns appeared. I stumbled to my desk and found my notebook, flipping frantically through the pages. My handwriting filled every page, but now I couldn't understand what I'd written. The words were English, but they made no sense together. Descriptions of experiences that couldn't have happened, observations of things that couldn't exist. In the margins of one page, I'd drawn a small diagram of a building, my building, with an X marking my apartment. Around it, I'd scribbled, point of origin? Why here? Why me? A horrible suspicion dawned. I ran to the closet where I kept my old work files. The classified documents about anomalies detected years ago. The research project I'd quit over ethical concerns. The papers were there, but altered. My name appeared as project lead on experiments I had no memory of conducting. My signature authorized protocols I would never have approved. Had my memories been changed? Or had reality itself been rewritten around me? I heard a distant sound like shattering glass. Looking out the window, I saw the largest tear yet, a massive rift opening in the nothingness outside. Through it poured a light unlike anything I'd ever seen, too bright and too dark simultaneously, bending as it entered our reality. My radio crackled again. 4, 4, 2, 1. The numbers had changed, but not in the way they should have. I picked up my phone, not expecting anything. To my surprise, it powered on, showing a map application with a single location marked. A place less than a mile from my apartment. A research facility I didn't recognize. The screen displayed a simple message: return to where it began. My head pounded with fragmented memories and contradictory thoughts. Had I done something? Started something? Was I somehow responsible for the tears in reality? I gazed out at the massive rift still pouring impossible light into our world. Within that light, I could now see shapes moving, approaching. The visitors from yesterday stood in the courtyard again, all facing my window. They no longer bothered maintaining their human disguises. Their forms rippled and shifted, revealing glimpses of what they truly were. They were coming for me, and deep down, in memories I couldn't quite access, I knew why. I was the threshold. I had always been the threshold, and now it was time to open the door. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken and restless. Each time I closed my eyes, equations scrolled behind my eyelids, the same patterns that covered my walls, etching themselves into my mind. I dreamed of standing at the center of the tears, watching as reality peeled away like old wallpaper, revealing something ancient and waiting underneath. I woke at dawn, my throat dry, head pounding. The light outside had changed again, not the directionless illumination of yesterday, but a deep amber glow that seemed to pulse with a rhythm like breathing. Something had changed during the night. I could feel it in the air, a heaviness that hadn't been there before, a presence. I approached the window cautiously, steeling myself for whatever new horror awaited. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the same void where my neighborhood had been, the same shimmering tears in the fabric of reality. Then I noticed them, figures standing at the perimeter of the void, perfectly still, watching my building, watching my window, watching me. I counted 7 of them, spaced evenly around the boundary where reality ended. They appeared human-shaped from a distance, but something about their proportions was subtly wrong. Limbs slightly too long, heads slightly too large. They wore what looked like dark suits, though the fabric seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They didn't move, not even the slight shifts of weight or posture that living creatures make unconsciously. They stood as if they'd always been there, as if they'd been carved from the landscape itself. The watchers. I knew somehow they weren't the same as the visitors who had come to my door. Those had been crude approximations, puppets. These were something else, something that had finally decided to show itself. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. When I looked again 10 minutes later, they appeared closer to the building, though I hadn't seen them move. Another 10 minutes, closer still. They were advancing each time I looked away. Like a childhood game of red light, green light, but with existential stakes. I retreated to my desk where my notebooks were spread open. Flipping through the pages, I found entries from weeks ago, dated before the first emergency alert, that described exactly what was happening now. April 3rd, dreamed again of the watchers. 7 figures in black. They stand at the boundary. They wait for permission to approach. April 7th, the equations are becoming clearer. If my calculations are correct, the initial breach will occur within 3 weeks. The power grid will fail first as the electromagnetic field destabilizes. April 12th, I've hidden the key where only I can find it. If I forget, I've left myself directions. Follow the coordinates when the time comes. I stared at the pages in disbelief. This was my handwriting, but I had no memory of writing these entries. The dates were from before the blackout began. I'd been having premonitions, or something worse, and had forgotten them. Had I been made to forget? The last functioning digital device in my apartment, an old tablet with a solar charger, suddenly lit up with a notification. The screen showed only a set of coordinates and a single pulsing red dot. The location was less than half a mile from my building. I looked out the window again. The watchers had moved closer, now forming a tight circle around my building. Still motionless when observed, but undeniably closer each time my attention wavered. I had to go to those coordinates. Whatever waited there might explain why this was happening, why my apartment stood at the center of reality's collapse, why I had notes predicting events before they occurred, why the Watchers had chosen me. I packed quickly, water bottle, flashlight, my notebooks, the tablet with the coordinates. As I reached for my jacket, I noticed something in the pocket I didn't remember placing there. A small brass key on a chain, unmarked and ancient looking. I've hidden the key where only I can find it. My own words echoed in my mind. I slipped the key around my neck and headed for the door. The hallway outside my apartment had changed. The doors to other units were gone, replaced by blank wall. The corridor stretched longer than it should have been possible, twisting at impossible angles. I followed it, fighting the vertigo that threatened to overwhelm me. The stairwell, at least, was where it should have been, though it now descended far deeper than the 4 floors my building had contained. I counted 12 flights before reaching the bottom, emerging into a lobby I barely recognized. The glass entrance doors showed the Watchers standing in a semicircle outside, still as statues, waiting. Their features were more visible now, smooth, blank faces with indentations where eyes should be. Not wearing suits after all, but glossy, black skin that reflected nothing. I couldn't leave through the front. Looking around desperately, I spotted a service door that led to the back alley. It hadn't been there before, but I didn't question the gift. I slipped through it and found myself in a narrow passage between buildings that shouldn't exist. Outside, the air felt thick, resistant, as if reality itself had become viscous. The amber light cast no shadows, yet somehow I could see perfectly in all directions. The coordinates led me east, away from the void that had consumed my neighborhood. I walked for what felt like hours, though the tablet showed I'd covered only a quarter mile. The city around me appeared abandoned but intact. No tears in reality here, no visible signs of the catastrophe that had swallowed my neighborhood. Had the phenomenon been contained to a small area, or was this another illusion? When I looked back, I could no longer see my building behind me. Instead, the Watchers stood in the distance, still in formation, still watching. Still closer than they had been before. The coordinates led me to a nondescript office building with no signage, no windows. A structure designed to be overlooked, to be forgotten. The brass key around my neck grew warm against my skin as I approached. There was a single door, stainless steel, with a small keyhole. No handle, no electronic lock, just the keyhole. The key fit perfectly. The door swung open silently, revealing a sterile white corridor that descended underground. I followed it down, passing unmarked doors until I reached a large circular chamber. In its center stood a device I recognized immediately, though I'd never seen it before. A mass of interlocking rings surrounding a central core of pulsing blue light. Cables and conduits spread from it like veins, disappearing into the walls, floor, and ceiling. This was it, the origin point, the place where the breach had begun. On a desk nearby, I found a leather-bound journal. My name was embossed on the cover. Inside, in my handwriting, Project Threshold, lead researcher's log. We succeeded beyond our expectations. We opened a door to somewhere else. But we didn't consider that doors work both ways. They've been watching us for millennia, waiting for someone to unlock the barrier between dimensions. Now they're coming through, converting our reality to match theirs. The blackout is just the beginning of the transformation process. I tried to warn everyone. I tried to shut it down. But it's too late. They're already here. If you're reading this, then I succeeded in at least one thing. I found my way back to where it began. Now I have to decide, do I close the door and trap them on our side? Or do I open it wider and let them take what they've come for? Either way, I am the threshold. I have always been the threshold. The journal fell from my trembling hands. As it hit the floor, I became aware of movement behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The Watchers stood in the doorway, no longer pretending to be bound by the laws of our reality. They had shed their human-like forms, revealing what lay beneath, beings of pure geometry, impossible angles and dimensions folded into shapes that hurt to perceive. They had been waiting for me to lead them here, to the threshold, to the door I had apparently opened. And now they waited for me to make my final choice. I stood frozen before the Watchers, their impossible geometries shifting and folding in ways that made my vision blur. My mind struggled to interpret what it was seeing, shapes that existed in more dimensions than our reality could contain, forced to project themselves into our limited space. For the first time, one of them communicated, not with sound, but with a pressure inside my skull, concepts and images flooding my consciousness. Threshold, creator, opener, witness. The words weren't spoken but understood, resonating in my bones. I clutched the journal to my chest, backing away until I hit the desk behind me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice small in the vast chamber. Completion, integration, transformation. More images flooded my mind, stars collapsing, realities merging, existence rewritten. I saw our universe as they saw it, incomplete, isolated, limited. And I saw what they intended, not destruction but change. Evolution by force. Did I do this? I whispered. Did I open the door? The nearest watcher extended what might have been a limb, though it appeared more like a localized distortion in the air. It pointed to the journal in my hands. Read. Remember. Accept. My fingers trembled as I opened the journal again, turning past the first entry to pages I hadn't yet seen. Diagrams, calculations, theories about dimensional barriers and quantum entanglement. As I read, fragments of memory began to resurface. Late nights in this laboratory, breakthroughs that shouldn't have been possible, warnings ignored in the pursuit of discovery. I had led the research team. I had calibrated the machine that now hummed in the center of the room. I had been the first to see the equations appear on our computer screens, the same patterns that now covered my walls, my notebooks, my dreams. But something had gone wrong, or perhaps exactly right from their perspective. The final pages of the journal detailed my desperate attempts to warn authorities, to shut down the project, to close what we had opened. I'd been silenced, discredited, my memories altered. Yet some part of me had planned for this moment, had left breadcrumbs for myself to follow back to the beginning. I closed the journal and looked up at the watchers. What happens if I destroy the machine? I asked. Futile. The threshold exists now in you. Of course. The patterns in my apartment, in my mind, they were the real doorway. The machine had just been the catalyst. I had become the living embodiment of the breach between worlds, a human threshold through which they were entering. I set the journal down carefully and approached the machine. Its blue light pulsed in synchronization with my heartbeat. I placed my hand on its surface, feeling the vibrations resonate through my body. In that moment, I made a decision. If I couldn't fight what was happening, I could at least document it, leave a record for whatever came after. Perhaps understanding was the only victory possible now. I returned to my apartment through streets that shifted and changed around me. The watchers followed at a distance, no longer hiding their presence. The tears in reality had multiplied, showing glimpses of the world transforming beyond my small pocket of remaining normalcy. For 3 days, I wrote continuously, describing everything I had learned, everything I had seen. I filled notebooks with observations of the changes occurring in the world, in myself. I documented the patterns of the watchers' movements, the timing of the reality fractures, the progression of the transformation. On the morning of the 4th day, I witnessed something that finally helped me understand. Through my window, I saw a person, an actual human being, not one of the visitors or watchers, standing at the edge of the void. They appeared confused, frightened, looking around at the transformed landscape. One of the watchers approached them. There was a moment of communication, similar to what I had experienced. Then, instead of fear, the person's face showed wonder. They reached out toward the watcher, and in that touch, they changed. Not violently, not painfully, but fundamentally. Their form rippled, the patterns that covered my walls briefly appearing on their skin. When it stopped, they stood straighter, moved differently. Not quite human anymore, but not like the watchers either. Something in between. They turned and looked directly at my window, their eyes now containing the same depth as the void itself. They had accepted the transformation and survived it. I understood then that what I was witnessing wasn't an invasion or an apocalypse in the traditional sense. It was evolution, forced, accelerated evolution of our reality into something more complex, more connected to whatever existed beyond our dimensional barriers. I continued documenting everything, filling the final pages of my last notebook with this realization. As I wrote, water from a glass on my desk began to move, forming complex patterns in the air, the same mathematical language that covered my walls. Using this understanding, I began translating the messages the watchers had been sending, the equations that had appeared throughout my apartment. They weren't instructions for conquest. They were a blueprint for transformation. I set down my pen and found that every electronic device in my apartment had simultaneously activated. My dead phone, tablet, even the old television. All showed the same message. Those who remain have been chosen as witnesses. Your role is to observe and record. Nothing more. The screens flickered, then displayed images from around the world. Other pockets of unchanged reality, other people like me, documenting the transformation from their own perspectives. We were being preserved, kept in our original state to serve as historians of the change. I wasn't special after all. I was just one of many thresholds, one of many witnesses. That night, I discovered new doors in my apartment, doors that hadn't existed before. One opened to a forest under an alien sky, another to a vast city of impossible architecture, a third to an ocean where the water flowed upward in vast columns. I stood before the door to the forest, feeling the warm breeze carrying scents I couldn't identify. Behind me, my apartment remained unchanged, my notes spread across the desk, the patterns on the walls pulsing gently. I understood my choice now. I could remain in this pocket of preserved reality, documenting the transformation until its completion. Or I could step through, accepting the change, becoming part of whatever new reality was being born. The Watchers had given me this choice deliberately. They needed both, those who would transform and those who would remember what had been lost. In the distance, through the open door, I saw figures moving among the trees. Not Watchers, but others who had chosen to step through, to evolve. They moved with purpose and awareness, neither human nor other, but something new. My hand gripped the doorframe, feeling the boundary between realities. The threshold I had helped create had become part of. I had spent my life seeking answers, pushing boundaries, opening doors. Even when my memories had been taken, that fundamental drive remained. I took a deep breath of the alien air from beyond the door. It tasted like possibility. Behind me, my notes waited, the record of what had been, preserved for whatever would come after. Before me, transformation beckoned, not an ending, but a beginning I couldn't yet comprehend. The choice was mine, to witness or to become. I stepped through the doorway. The transition wasn't dramatic, no flash of light, no disorienting shift. One moment I was standing in my apartment, the next I existed simultaneously in multiple places, multiple states of being. I was still me, still possessed the core of my identity, but expanded, fractured across realities that had once been separate, but now flowed into one another like tributaries joining a river. My consciousness stretched thin at first, struggling to process the multiplicity of experience. I perceived my apartment behind me, preserved like an artifact in a museum. I saw the forest ahead, its alien vegetation pulsing with bioluminescence under a sky that contained too many moons. And I experienced countless other locations simultaneously, desert landscapes of crystalline formations, vast cityscapes that defied Euclidean geometry, ocean depths where thought itself took physical form. Through this kaleidoscopic awareness, I understood at last. The blackout hadn't been an invasion. The tears in reality weren't wounds but sutures, binding separated dimensions back together. What I had helped create, what I had become, was not a breach but a reunion. We were always meant to be whole, came the thought, though whether it was mine or communicated from elsewhere, I couldn't tell. Your kind separated the dimensions long ago, fearing what you couldn't understand. We have waited for someone to open the way back. Memories that weren't mine flooded my expanded consciousness. I saw the ancient past, humans discovering the equations that could partition reality, isolating our dimension to develop in controlled simplicity, protected from the complex interconnectedness that had once been existence's natural state. My research team hadn't discovered something new. We had rediscovered something ancient, reopening doorways that had been deliberately sealed. As my perception adjusted to its new parameters, I began to distinguish individual streams of consciousness within the larger flow. The Watchers were there, their geometries no longer painful to perceive now that I wasn't limited to three-dimensional sight. The visitors too, not crude imitations as I'd thought, but scouts, explorers sending back impressions of our isolated reality to prepare for reconnection. And others like me, humans who had stepped through their own doorways, their consciousness expanded beyond former limitations. Some had gone before me, some were only now making the transition. Together, we formed a network of awareness spreading through the rejoining realities. Through this network, I perceived the process from outside, saw the full scope of what had appeared as catastrophe from my limited human perspective. The blackout spreading across the Midwest, then beyond, was the visible manifestation of dimensions reintegrating. Electricity failed because energy itself was being redistributed across a more complex framework of physical laws. Communications broke down as the very concept of distance was being redefined. What had seemed like an ending was, from this expanded view, clearly a transformation. I turned my attention outward, looking back toward what had been my world. The process was accelerating, the remaining pockets of unchanged reality shrinking by the moment. Most humans were transitioning unconsciously, their minds temporarily protected by incomprehension until they could adjust to their new state. Others, like me, had been prepared to serve as guides. Our awareness expanded early to help navigate the reintegration. And a few remained in preservation spaces, the witnesses, documenting the transition from the perspective of what had been, maintaining continuity between old and new. Their apartments, homes, and shelters stood like islands in the stream of transformation, untouched for now. Time worked differently in this expanded state. I could perceive backward and forward along probabilistic paths. I saw myself at the beginning of this journey, checking my phone on that ordinary morning, dismissing the first subtle signs of change. I felt a surge of compassion for that former self, so limited in understanding, so determined to maintain control. I reached across time, wanting somehow to offer comfort, to explain that what was coming, while terrifying from a human perspective, was not the end but a difficult, necessary evolution. The visitors appeared around me then, no longer wearing their human disguises. In their true form, they resembled patterns of light and dark, information given sentience. They had been human once, or something like human, inhabitants of a neighboring reality who had undergone their own transformation eons ago. You understand now, they communicated. You see the whole. I do, I replied, my voice everywhere and nowhere. But the transition is traumatic for those who don't understand. There must have been a gentler way. We tried. For centuries, we sent dreams, inspiration, glimpses. Your artists and scientists caught fragments of understanding. But the separation had been too complete, the forgetting too thorough. Only a shock could break through. They showed me attempts at contact through history, mathematical insights appearing in dreams, mystical visions, scientific breakthroughs that came in sudden flashes of inspiration. All efforts to prepare humanity for an eventual reunion with the greater reality. Your research succeeded where others failed because you were ready to remember. The expanded awareness allowed me to see the truth of this statement. My lifelong fascination with theoretical physics, my intuitive understanding of principles others found impenetrable, these weren't random talents but fragments of remembering what humanity had once known. I turned my attention to the machine in the underground laboratory, seeing it now for what it truly was, not a device that created a breach, but a key that unlocked what had always been there. The equations hadn't opened a new door. They had removed the barriers we'd placed in an existing one. Time continued to flow strangely around me. I perceived my past self entering that laboratory again, confronting the watchers, making the choice to step through. I watched as other humans made similar choices across the dwindling islands of unchanged reality. Some chose to remain as witnesses, others embraced transformation. The visitors gathered around me, joined by others who had completed their transition. It is time, they communicated. The reintegration reaches its final phase. You must help complete the process. I understood what they meant. Those of us who had transitioned early needed to guide the final reconnection, to ensure the preservation of what was valuable from human experience, while allowing the fuller reality to reestablish itself. I extended my awareness back toward Earth, toward the diminishing pockets of unchanged reality. In one, I found myself at the very beginning, waking on that ordinary morning, checking my phone, about to receive the first emergency alert. I tried to warn that past self, to prepare them for what was coming. But I realized the paradox immediately. If I prevented the transformation from occurring as it had, I would never reach this expanded state to send the warning in the first place. The cycle needed to complete itself. Instead, I sent understanding, not to change events, but to provide context for the fear, to plant seeds of acceptance that would flower when needed most. Across the reunifying dimensions, the last barriers dissolved. The emergency broadcast system activated one final time across all remaining devices. In every preserved pocket of the old reality, from every speaker, radio, and screen, my voice echoed, recognizable yet transformed. The blackout is complete. The new light begins. The message marked the final integration, the moment when separation ended and wholeness returned. What had been Earth, what had been human, what had been isolated and protected was now rejoined with the greater tapestry of existence. I perceived it all, the end that was a beginning, the darkness giving way to new light, the the limited becoming unlimited. The fear transforming into wonder as understanding dawned across billions of consciousnesses simultaneously. In that moment of completion, I finally understood my role entirely. I hadn't been a victim or even merely a catalyst. I had been a bridge, a translator between states of being, helping to gentle a transition that, without guides like me, might have been more traumatic still. The cycle had completed. What was separated had been rejoined. And in the new light that rose across all dimensions, we began again. Neither what we had been nor what had existed before, but something new, born from the reunion of all possibilities.